Well, hello. Welcome to this episode of About Time. I'm Chris Nichols, and I'm delighted that today I'm being joined by my guest, Michael Chaskalson, who I've known for a long time. Michael is a writer, a meditator, a mindfulness teacher, an organization consultant, a visiting academic, and about 1,000 other things. And he's got one of the coolest studios he's sitting in right here in the bottom of a garden in Cambridge, and it's a delight. I've seen it, and it also looks great on camera. Um, Michael, can I just take a couple of seconds just to remind people what we're doing on the podcast generally, and then I'm going to ask you to say a few words to introduce yourself. But this is part of my About Time series, Project 65, and I'm having conversations with people who I've worked with in the last 20, 30 years who've inspired me, influenced my work. And Michael, you're one of those. So I'm just delighted that, you're here and that I can call you a friend and a colleague and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. Likewise, also absolutely delighted that we've had the chance to work together and that I met you. It's wonderful.
Mm. So could we start off by saying a few words then, Michael, about um, what you do that adds uh, some detail to the description of things that I,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, well, okay. So I've been in the sort of mindfulness stroke contemplative world for a long time, since the mid 1970s. Some of that pretty much full time. And I was living in urban retreat centers or urban meditation centers, rural retreat centers, um, mainly getting on with teaching, studying, and practicing Buddhism very much full time since I was about 22, 23 years old. In that context, I had a little foray into entrepreneurship. With others, I helped to set up a fair trade company that came to be quite successful. The company grew quite rapidly to a state of employing a couple of hundred people, selling 10 million sterling a year, giving away £1 million a year to worthy causes. Um, it wasn't in the end what I wanted to do, but having the opportunity to participate in that sort of early phase of a frantic startup was a useful experience in later things that I've come to do. So I gave my shareholding away. I went back to doing the Buddhism stuff full time, which I very happily continued to do up until the early 2000s, when I wanted to make a change. I wanted to get married, have a different kind of life. And I looked around for something that would enable me to change that and earn a living. And I found a master's program that had been set up in the clinical applications of mindfulness. So I joined that program. I was the first graduate from that program, in fact, the first master's graduate in the world. And I taught on the program for many years. Um, so that was lovely, having that experience. Mainly in those days, we were teaching clinicians in the National Health Service how to deliver mindfulness as a mental health intervention, because there was some really good data showing how successful that could be. Then executive coaches asked me to deliver a mindfulness for coaches course. I did that. Some of those coaches then brought me into organizations. I got brought as well into Ashridge, what was then Ashridge Business School, where we did some research into mindful leadership. And increasingly, my work just came to constellate around mindfulness in leadership and generally, um, how the various approaches that I've taken over the years might be in various ways valuable for people trying to lead. Um, and that's something that I just pursued in various forms, both as a consultant working with you, which was wonderful, working in different business schools around the world, giving keynotes, doing bits and bobs. It's been very bitty and bobby over the years, and there's been lots of books and writing along the way, but mainly it sort of all constellates around, how do Buddhist informed approaches to life uh, help people struggling to lead better today.
Yeah, brilliant. And the thing I've loved in our conversations over the years has been, this you started a very long time ago, as you said, in the 1970s. This isn't like uh, a fad that you've stumbled upon to sell consulting. I mean, this has some deep roots, and it goes back into your early history back in South Africa, doesn't it? When
Oh, yeah.
you actually took a moral, ethical decision to make a move, and then went in a search for kind of right way to live, I guess.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I grew up in fairly privileged circumstances in South Africa. You know, my dad was the CEO of a publicly listed firm, and that gave us a very privileged life in a country where being white itself was a privilege. But I never remember being comfortable with that. Always remember questioning it, feeling the discomfort of it. Parts of our family were also political activists in different ways. Some of them were activists within the legal profession. So my dad's brother um, was one of the defendants of Nelson Mandela at his trial. One of my mother's uncles was convicted along with some of those people and spent a long time in prison. So different ways. There were activists in the family. Um, and that helped me to question. And yeah, so in the end, I decided when I was 18 that I had to go. And by 19, I was living in the UK trying to figure out how to make a life. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, I, how does that sort of activism and the history of leaving what was an unpalatable regime and a very, very tragic regime for some people, how does that turn up in your work?
That's very interesting. I mean, all of my work is informed by, I would say, a kind of fundamental humanism, a kind of fundamental sense that people need to treat one another as human beings. We need to treat each other with decency, with kindness, with respect. I mean, this is not unusual as a set of values. Not at all. There's nothing special about that. You know, the idea that we need to treat each other as human and as worthy of respect. But in organizations, it becomes increasingly difficult to do. The pressures that people experience in organizational life are constantly pushing people to compromise their fundamental humanism. And, the organizational pressures pushed people into objectifying one another, push people into treating other people as objects whose main purpose is to fulfill a goal of some sort, which is external to them, not their goals, but the goals of the organization, the goals of the team, the goals of the leader, um, and other concerns that they may have must be subservient to the wider purpose of the organization, the leader, the team, etc., etc., etc. And I
Yeah,
find that slightly repugnant, to be honest. Although I completely understand and sympathize with the pressures that push people in that direction.
yeah,
And part of my work, I feel, is trying to help people to discover in themselves the resources that will enable them to resist those pressures while still somehow thriving in the organization. And it's tricky, tricky, tricky.
yeah. Do you know? I mean, first of all, obviously, this echoes um, some of my own interests, and the whole reason we set up Game Shift was to be in service of flourishing, both
Yes,
human, organizational, and planetary. Um,
yes,
so that's one of the things that drew us together in our work. Um,
yeah,
but you're reminding me just of a recent conversation on one of these with Jeff Mead. Um,
Yes.
Jeff Mead, storyteller, and I don't know if you've ever worked with Jeff. Have you worked with Jeff?
No.
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 So Jeff, I've known for a long time, and he's a storyteller and a teacher of storytelling, but also of something he calls narrative leadership.
Right.
And you know, the point of connection between his work, your work, my work, is this point of it's very easy to get stuck in a story, which may not even be your own story. It may be
Yeah.
um, Jeff talks about the difference between um, system world and life world, which comes from
Yes.
the sociology of Habermas.
Yes.
And and I heard that loud and clear in what you were just saying. How
Yes.
easy it is for people to play roles in this clockwork, inhuman machine system
Yes.
that's all kinds of things other than humanity, other
Yes.
than life. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
because you also, I mean, you're a coach as well, aren't you? You do one to
Yes.
one. How
Yes.
extent are you helping people to either recognize story or change story? Or I mean,
What I'm really, really interested in is helping the people I work with, first of all, to recognize and accept their own humanity, to see that, they are allowed to have feelings, they are allowed to be fallible, they're allowed to make mistakes, they're allowed to get peed off, that it's all allowed. That's really, really vital. And to not judge themselves too harshly, and likewise, and also not to judge others quite so harshly. So, some of the coaching is in hearing, people's struggles with others in an organization and say, well, can we look at what it's like for them to be them? You know, what's the experience like, and what are we trying to address here? What change are we seeking to bring about? And if we don't really get the other person as a person, change is not going to happen. So let's investigate. So a lot of it is around, you know, allowing the whole raft of humanity in the organization to be as human as possible, with all the fallibility that that implies and all the annoyance that that implies and the frustration, and then to figure out on the basis of what we can intuit around, you know, the people involved, what would be helpful,
yeah,
what would help them, yeah,
mm,
and what would be mutually helpful.
yeah,
But a
and,
lot of it's in that territory.
yeah, and you and I have um, worked on both leadership programs and organizational interventions in client situations, whether it's health systems or food systems or all kinds of things. And I think the thing that they have in common has been, big stuff is shifting in the system, and the organization has no choice but to respond to that.
Yes,
And that horrific pressure on the chief exec or the exec team, and
yes,
be
yes,
yeah. Um, but
yes,
I've seen you coaching chief execs and executive teams and helping them to be more effective at the
yes,
same time as um, not pretend that they know the answer. Not,
exactly,
yeah. And there is something
exactly.
about the sheer humanity of not knowing being a
Yes,
powerful. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
mm,
be willing to not know, and also to, see your own mind at work is such an important piece of this. To be
yeah,
able to step back and recognize that, you know, this whole picture that we have of the organization, of myself and the place of things, and my place in the scheme, it's all made up.
yeah,
It's all made up. It's all imagined. It's not real. It's all imagined. And since it's all imagined, how can we work with it in recognition of that?
yeah.
And that is the
Now,
made up nature of things is profoundly true, whether you're in an organization or not.
well, I completely love this, and I know I recognise this in the AIM model, which you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Did you develop it with Megan, or did it
Yes.
pre-exist?
Yeah. No.
But
We
wrote
we
about
developed it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and subsequently, you and I and others have written about it quite a lot. And it's a really
Yes.
powerful thing. I mean, there are probably people listening to this who don't know the AIM model. So could you just say just a little bit about it?
Yeah. The AIM model, it emerged from our mindful leader research. So Megan and I conducted a research project at Ashridge, was then still Ashridge Business School, with a bunch of self-described senior business leaders. We gave them some significant mindfulness training over 8 weeks and measured all kinds of changes, compared them with a waitlist control group, did lots of interviews, gained a lot of qualitative information, and crunched all the data. And what we found was that when people learn contemplative practices in the context of leadership training, they discover a capacity to allow a bit more what is the case to be the case. Let what's here be what's here. Used to say, let what is the case be the case. Let reality be what it is. We spend so much of our time resisting that, it shouldn't be like this. They shouldn't be like that. It should be different. And it's not. It is what it is. And if you're stuck in, if only that person wasn't on my team, everything would be okay. If only I had a different boss, everything would be okay. If you're stuck in that mode of mind, it's a bit choiceless.
Yeah,
But when you can go, right, well, that person is on my team, how am I going to be with this? Then choice opens up. Okay, now I can choose. I'm in reality. That person is on my team. I'm not doing it shouldn't, they shouldn't, as if, but it is. So from here, what next? And my suggestion here is always what next is what's most appropriate, what's best, best for me, best for them, best for the organization. What step would be best from here, from actual here?
yeah,
So that's allowing. Inquiry is the I in a inquiry. It's kind of curiosity, interest, investigation. What's actually going on? What is it? We jump so rapidly to conclusions, especially when people are trying to work at speed and at pace. Um, and you lose touch with the lived experience of now, what's actually happening. So the I is a kind of inquiry, investigation, a looking into what's actually going on right now. Right now, in my experience, in their experience, what's actually happening. And then the meta awareness is this capacity to step back and to see that your thoughts, your feelings, your impulses are just a stream of thoughts and feelings and impulses. They're not reality. They're not the way things are. They're thoughts about the way things are. And that's different. Thoughts about the way things are aren't the same as the way things are. Now, that is deeply profound, actually. Meta awareness is one of the most profound things we can imagine, because when we really push that investigation, when we really push that investigation, we come to see that actually we're making stuff up out of tiny fragments. We catch a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And out of that, we knit a story.
we are such pattern-seeking creatures.
We just are. We cannot but do that. That's how humans work. That's the only way we know to work.
Mm.
But a story is not the same as a fact. It's just a story. So we catch tiny fragments of information, and we knit up a story, and then we act as if that story was real, and that's a big mistake. And with meta awareness, we see ourselves doing this. We see what we're up to, and then we can make wiser choices. Let me give you a lovely example of how you get to understand a
Please.
bit more of meta awareness. Here's a quick, brief story. John was on his way to school. He was worried about the maths lesson. He didn't think he could control the class today. After all, it's not part of a janitor's duties. Okay, so notice in that at every stage, every sentence or phrase, you're creating a story. John was on his way to school, and you picture a little boy on his way to school. Okay, he's worried about the math lesson. Oh no, poor kid. Maybe he's not done his homework. You get a sense of his dragging his satchel. It's not comfortable. His backpack. He
Mm.
didn't think he could control the class today. Oh, right, he's a teacher. Get a whole new picture. We form this picture of this young teacher going off to school, worried about the class, and it's not past the janitor's duties.
Yeah.
So we always make stories, and we don't see ourselves doing that. And with meta awareness, we learn to catch ourselves in the process, or at least understand ourselves in the process. You see it unfolding,
Yeah.
and that's different. That's powerful.
Mm. Yeah. So, I I mean, forgive me now, I may be jumping all over the place, but
Sure, that's lovely.
yeah, you know, I've got two things going on in my head. I mean, one is I've got, you are one of the very few people um, I work with who kind of brings, um, what's it called? It's dependent arising. Is that right? Is that the
Oh,
right
yeah,
term?
yeah, yeah. That's a
Yeah,
good word. Yeah, yeah.
dependent arising into organizational life. And of course, it's there.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
um, and everything being a consequence of everything, and it goes around in a chain. And the whole point of um, Buddhist work is to interfere with that chain so that stuff doesn't arise in the same way. And that's what you're talking about, and it's massively spiritual and massively practical
yes,
in the same
yes,
moment. And I love that.
yes,
Uh,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. And another thing, I just the other day was rereading. I've probably read it about a dozen times. Stephen Batchelor's "What Is This?" A tiny little book is a reflection on a
Oh, yeah,
sonnery,
yeah,
um, and he plays with that question:
yeah,
what is this? Yeah,
yes,
it's a writing up of the morning and evening briefings, and the guidance for the day, and then the evening talks of this retreat.
right,
And
right.
it's a wonderful thing, and I think as organization consultants and practitioners, there's something incredibly important about what is this? What is this
Yes, yes,
organization
yes,
thing? How does it come about? How do
yes,
these things that seem to follow each other? How do they?
yes,
Why? Yeah, what causes them? What's the cycle of causation? And that's where we're
yes,
working. And
yes,
your work helps people to actually spot themselves in it in real time.
yes,
Incredibly
yes.
important.
It's what I aspire to do. I think that the thing is that we take so much as kind of given, and it doesn't need to be like that. The situation doesn't need to be like this. And if we can really begin to understand some of the causal conditions for how we got to be here, how this got to be like this, what's actually driving the system, what's driving me in the system, what's driving the system in me, and so on and so on. We begin to just find some of the nuggets that expose some of this. Then we get a huge amount of potential to change things for the better. Yeah, yeah, to intervene in the system in a way which is more effective. Yeah, more in line with our values. I'll tell you one thing. Pretty much all of the chief execs that I've worked with are people whom, yeah, I think, yeah, pretty much all of them, people whom I respect, people who I think have really, really, really good values at heart, really mean well. And many times, people in that position I meet feel overwhelmed by the scale of the task they have and deeply challenged in terms of trying to effectuate their deepest held values in the system which they're trying to manage, trying to work within.
Yes, and I mean, you know, I know some of the chief executives you've worked with, and obviously not all, and I share that view of them. I mean, the ones I know
Yeah,
that you, I mean, lovely people, um,
Yeah.
and really caught on, you know,
Yes.
on a metaphorical hook or between a rock and a
Yeah.
hard place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to do good work in incredibly difficult circumstances.
It is so hard. I really, really, I mean, it's just getting harder. That's my sense. My sense of organizational life today is it's just getting harder and harder
Yeah,
and harder.
well, yeah. So I was going to say, I mean, does the work you do, does the work we do, become more necessary but more unlikely in these times?
Yeah.
Because I've got in
Yeah.
mind words of Brian Goodwin, the um, mathematical biologist, used to be um, after he retired from the Open University, he worked at Schumacher College, and absolute guru of complexity. And he always used to say to me, he said, never, never forget, he said, human systems in a crisis always tend towards control. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
and I'm
Yes.
seeing in almost everywhere I work, you've got these well-meaning,
Yes.
well-intending, very, very bright leaders
Yeah.
who
Yes.
know they can't actually control everything, but
Yes.
pressured by their own internal drivers and their stakeholders to
Yes.
pull into positions of certainty and control. And it's really hard to hold the balance of allowing an organization to explore, allowing an
Yes.
organization to react in more human ways when you've got
Yes.
what's going on global politics, global economy going on. You know,
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. In times of, for example, high inflation and high labor costs, you know, the enormous push to try and cut, and to,
yeah,
drive harder and harder and harder. Um, and of course, some of these pressures are real. If the organization doesn't survive, everyone's out of a job.
yeah,
Um, so I absolutely don't underestimate the genuine, deep challenge that people face in trying to keep the show on the road in ways that enable everyone to earn a living,
mm,
while at the same time, deliver our good friend shareholder value, and um,
mm,
make it all worthwhile for all the stakeholders.
yeah, yeah. And at the same time, trying to invent or reinvent or have a view of the future that is going to be fundamentally different than today.
Yeah, yeah,
Both we've worked together in health, we've worked together in food systems, and neither of those systems are going to be the same 5 years or 10 years from now. They just can't.
no,
They,
no,
you know,
no,
yeah,
no,
and at the same time, they're being driven to cut costs and make a margin,
yes, yes,
serve infinitely more patients with infinitely more complex conditions with no money.
yes,
You know,
yes, yes,
they have to meet the day to day and
yeah,
reinvent the
yeah,
system. That's
yeah, no, and the
a risk.
pressures are absurd.
Yeah.
The pressures are absurd. Cut the waiting lists and reduce health inequalities, and do it within this time frame. Well, with what? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So now I know you're. Are you writing a book at the moment, or are you certainly doing a new
I
thing?
am. No, I'm writing a book. I'm nearly written it. I think I've only got a few more weeks of writing left in it. Um, so, so
So,
the
so
book is
what about?
provisionally entitled. It's for Wiley, and it's provisionally entitled "From Mindfulness to Wakefulness." So, so the premise is that mindfulness has become like very common now. It's just widely known in the culture. Everyone's had a go, either they like it or don't like it, done it. But it's just widely known about. When I first started to try teach it in the early 2000s, no one knew what I was talking about.
Hmm,
Now it's very, very commonly known. But this is a tiny, tiny, tiny slice of an approach that was really set up to enable humans to feel more freedom, liberation. um, understanding. It's one of many, many approaches that have been set out to do that. And the big value that we get from the work that's been done in the mindfulness movement is that it's allied itself to psychological science, to neuroscience. So we've now got a huge amount of data and understanding and a language where we can talk about what happens in people's experience in their minds in the mindfulness world using a language which is common to all of us. We can talk about the neuroscience of it, which parts of the brain are affected by the way in which you pay attention, and so on and so on. So there's a fairly common language out there now to talk about mindfulness. Enables me to talk about it in organizations and leadership and so on. But there's a lot more available. And the bigger prize, the really big prize, is what I call wakefulness. So wakefulness is, sometimes awakening has been is a translation of the Buddhist term, Pali, Sanskrit Buddhist term, bodhi, another mode of being, what the Buddha discovered, another mode of being in the world, which is unself-centered, you could say.
Yeah.
There's no self-reference, no egotism or no ego in the experience. It's an experience of oneself as a part of, or a selfless part of, a wider reality. One can come to experience oneself in those terms. There's obviously a built-in contradiction here when I say experience oneself. One experiences oneself as a not self, if you like. So getting away from all of those contradictions, wakefulness can be spoken of as, at its ultimate, the perfect mindfulness, perfect compassion, perfect ethics, perfect understanding of how things are, perfect egolessness, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, we can work backwards. So we can go, well, any increase in mindfulness is an increase in wakefulness. Any increase in compassion is an increase in wakefulness. Any increase in understanding how things are is an increase in wakefulness, and so on and so on. So the book I'm writing is around how you can increase some of these factors in your own life and become more wakeful. So it's not about gaining enlightenment or, having a big bang or anything like that. It's about progressively deepening some of these really desirable factors in your own life, and how we can set about to doing that. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited by this.
Yeah, and again, I'm loving this because I mean, whilst you could be, massively metaphysical about this, I mean, that's not the point. This is really practical stuff, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
Um, and
Yes,
and and in some ways, that's core Buddhism. It's really practical
yes,
stuff. You don't
it is. Yeah, yeah,
require, um, yeah, you don't require anything beyond paying attention to the human condition
exactly,
and and
exactly.
illusions around the
Yeah,
human
yeah.
condition.
And paying attention to your experience. The, the,
Yeah.
the wonderful thing, though, is that over the last 30 years, we've had this tremendous development in the world of cognitive science, evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, and so on, which gives us a language to talk about many of these different modalities, aspects of wakefulness, in ways that are really down to earth and simple. Um, they're not mystical. It doesn't have to be mystical. My assertion is that um, what we call awakening is a natural, it's not a supernatural state. It's just how the mind comes to function under certain conditions. And if we can develop some of those conditions, we can lead much more wholesome lives. That's the assertion.
Yeah. I really like that. I mean, for my, one of my learning edges recently is I've been taking part in Peter Reason's Living Waters co-inquiry project. So um, it's a shared inquiry group working with what 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 is it like? Oh, I see that a thumb up has appeared on the screen. That's because I'm waving my arms around. I must
Oh
stop waving.
no.
Yeah. Um, so Peter's group is saying, what is it like to treat bodies of water as sentient beings? So to have a relationship with a river and a river system as a sentient entity.
Mm.
And I was struggling hugely with the sort of metaphysical edge of that. Was I
Yes.
expecting some kind
Yes.
of communication? Was I willing something to happen? Until I came back to Stephen Batchelor's
Mm.
Sonri, where
Mm.
Stephen Batchelor reminded me that there's absolutely no need to do anything other than turn up
Yes.
and pay attention
Yes.
and just
Yes.
note what happens.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Exactly.
and, no,
Exactly.
and notice what gets in the way of noticing what happens. And that's, I suppose,
Yes.
the metacognition, and then wonderful things happen.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. Indeed. 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 Indeed.
yeah. So there are loads of other things we could talk about. I mean, what's the when you finish your book? Is it going to be like the next stage in your consulting, teaching? Is it going to be a road show, film, play, Broadway? What is it, Michael?
Uh, that is a mystery to me. Um, I really have no idea, Chris. I mean, I suppose I will discover what kind of appetite there is for these ideas. I'll send it out. I'll find out. And if there's an appetite, then I'd love to respond to it. But and I don't know the form that that would take. I don't want to presume anything here. I have no plan. I really do have no plan. I'm putting some stuff out there. If people resonate, if there are people who resonate with it, then we can
Yeah,
rock and roll with
yeah.
that. But let's see. I mean, it might be I put it out there and people go, yeah, whatever, or don't get this, or who knows. We'll find out.
And when is the book due?
I don't know. I'm meant to deliver it in August, but it's going to be ready way before then. So we'll see. And
Yeah,
I
then
don't know how fast Wiley work.
yeah, it goes into a publishing cycle, and there'll be a slot
Yeah,
for it somewhere. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah,
you never know.
yeah.
You never know. It may come out while I'm still doing this series of Project 65 podcasts. In which case, I'll invite you to come back and talk specifically about the
Oh,
book and the
I'd love to. I'd love to. Yeah.
yeah. But I also hope that we'll get to do some of that together, either as game shift or otherwise, and
Yeah.
maybe some of it with the old team that we had once upon a
Mhm.
time. You, me,
Absolutely.
Megan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, and John, that would be so cool. That would be very cool. But we could also do maybe a game shift pop up when the book's out on you know what is the self or something like that, and play an inquiry around that.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
figure it.
Well, yeah. I'd love that because I mean, I think there are so many connections to, we've talked about this before. We've talked with Helen Shiroda about this, the connections between the uh, Assagioli psychosynthesis view of the self as subpersonalities, and um, I was again talking about this with Jeff yesterday. How his work on he's just finished a master's on therapeutic creative writing for therapeutic purposes and the reclaiming of different elements of the self and reclaiming and creating a different story. And that relates so closely to the psychosynthesis, subpersonalities, and again, reclaiming a story with agency. And I can see a lot of that in the work you do, um, and the place of awakening and wakefulness in that. I mean, it's not
Yes.
something you do on autopilot. It's
No. No.
yeah,
No. And of course from the point of view of awakening, The self is just made up,
Mm.
and we can stop making it up,
Yeah.
or we could make up less of a self,
Yeah. Yeah.
do less of it, less
You know,
something.
Assagioli, in his central model of personality, the thing that we commonly called I, he describes as empty. He says the I is um,
Yes,
uh,
yes,
awareness and will, and the will is what we attach. It tends to get, it's our, if you like, our energy that can get pulled in all kinds of directions by the subpersonalities unless we know them, almost know them as characters, and then have some
yes,
choice directing. Yeah.
yes.
I can see all kinds of parallels. And of course, it turns out that Assagioli had some connections to Mahayana Buddhism,
Uh,
um, and, and had some knowledge of Eastern traditions there. So there were
yes,
some, at least, cross references. Um,
yes,
it was informed by, but not
yes,
only, it was also informed by
yes,
very Jewish traditions as well.
indeed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess the big issue is, we can harden ourselves against the world, or we can open into relationship with the world and allow
Mm.
ourselves to be impacted along with others. And it's that tendency to harden and to separate, or to open and connect, that I think is really central.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that once more, because I think it's such a nice thing.
Talking about, well, the tendency to harden and
Yeah.
separate, as opposed to the tendency to open and connect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Uh,
that. There's so much, particularly in organizational life, can fossilize us, can ossify.
yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, yeah. And any work that lets that get loosened up,
Yeah.
so that things are more alive, less fossilized, new things can happen.
Yes.
And and the work you do, I've seen it for myself with all kinds of organizations, genuinely, in a very practical, very human way, helps that to happen, which is, why I like working with you, Michael. I mean, it's lovely stuff.
No, well, and I love working with you, Chris. I learned so much from
Mm.
you. You've
Well,
got so
hey,
much more experience in this world,
long may it continue.
and long may it continue.
So, Michael, I mean, we're almost at our 45 minutes. Um, it's gone in a flash. I just want to say thank you for coming along and being part of it, and also um, to say that later on, if we're still doing this series when your book is out, let's do another one, and we'll definitely do the podcast to launch the book. Of course, it would be a delight. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you.
brilliant. So, just say, Michael, thank you so much. Go well,
Thank you.
and thank you for coming, and thank you everybody who's been looking at this for having a look. And there'll be another one in due course. Thank you. Bye bye for now. Bye bye, Michael.
Bye. Bye bye.